I've heard it over and over and over again for decades, that God's okay with women in authority. In fact, he even set up Deborah as a judge in Israel. And the fact that God set up Deborah as a judge in Israel would show you that he doesn't really have a problem with women in authority. And what Paul said about women in authority, that's just the culture of the day. Now, I've heard that kind of thing, maybe not in those exact words, but the gist of that, preached and taught for decades. But there's a secret. There's a secret that these preachers, that these spiritual leaders, there's a secret that they don't want you to know. There's a secret that they're not telling you. And most of them don't even want to look at it themselves. They don't even want to admit it themselves. Many of them just totally deny it because the pressure is too great upon them. The secret is that Deborah was not put in as a judge by God. She was put in by the people. Now you look at, now I know a lot of you would say, that's it. I don't want to hear anymore. No, listen. What I'm telling you is the absolute truth. Go into Judges chapter 4. Now this is where Deborah makes her debut in the Bible. We don't see her at all until Judges chapter 4. Judges chapter 4 starts out by telling us that the children of Israel are in sin, that they're in rebellion, that they're living against God. Well, actually, even going back to chapter 2, you see that the children of Israel were just in total rebellion, just total sin. They were serving idols, and they just totally disregarded God and his laws and his commandments. And it is evident in the fact that they chose Deborah to be a judge over them. Now, some people might say, well, how do you know that the people put Deborah in charge? Well, if you know the history, if you know the entire context of the Bible, the whole idea of judges being over Israel began with Moses, because he was the only judge over Israel in the time when he brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. And Jethro saw that he was the only guy that was judging all this whole nation. He said, you can't do it. You cannot do it. You got to appoint people to be like, heads over thousands, heads over hundreds, and you've got to set up a hierarchy in place. You got to put judges in place, and only the most difficult matters are what they'll bring to you. So Moses listened to Jethro, and that's exactly what he did. And so that's what happened. Now, it began with Moses. He put judges in place. And then Joshua, he put judges in place, and so on and so forth down the line. After Joshua, after Caleb passed away, their successors, it was their responsibility to replace the judges that either left or passed away or whatever. It's almost like a country now that when a superior judge, a Supreme Court judge passes away, the president or the government in charge is actually responsible for replacing that judge. So by the time it got to Deborah, the whole nation was corrupt. They fell away from the commands of God, and it was evident in the fact that they chose Deborah to be a judge. Why do I say that? Because if you look at it, if you go back in the scriptures, if you read it in context, if you know what you're talking about, it all started in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21. Moreover, you shall provide out of the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them, to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens, and let them judge the people at all seasons. Now, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 1. Now, Moses kind of just rehashes this in Deuteronomy chapter 1. Let's read it. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 12. How can I myself alone bear your cumbrance and your burden and your strife? Take you wise men and understanding and known among your tribes, and I will make them rulers over you. And he goes on to say in verse 16 that they will be the judges. this is the law of God, that they are supposed to choose men to be judges. When the children of Israel went into total rebellion against God, when they became corrupt and they just disregarded God's ways, or, I'm sure everybody at that time had their own excuse, and I'm sure everybody still thought that they were serving God and worshiping God, but in fact they weren't. They were in sin and in rebellion. And you can see that very clearly in Judges chapter 4, where Deborah makes her debut. Again, just before that, it's very clear. The nation is corrupt. The nation is corrupt. And because of that, the people who were in charge of choosing judges would have obviously been corrupt too. So they disregarded God's law and his word. They disregarded the fact that God chose men all the way down the line up until then to be rulers and in places of authority. Never a woman. It was Adam that was created first. It was not Eve. They weren't created together. They were created separately, which speaks volumes if you think about it. And that's a totally different subject. I'll probably deal with that in another video. But Deborah was not placed in that position by God. She was placed in that position by a corrupt people. Now, I know some people may say, well, it says in the Bible that she's a prophetess. Now, she's got to be close to God to be a prophetess. I mean, she can't be a prophet without being, close to God. Well, yes, you can. I mean, look at being a prophet doesn't mean you're perfect. There's a lot of prophets we can look at in the scriptures, like even Moses. He disobeyed God to the point where he made God so angry. God said, your punishment is you won't even get in. You'll die before you get to the promised land. And of course, David with his adultery, but he's one of the greatest prophets in the scripture. And then we can go on, we talk about Jonah who ran away from God, and he's a prophet. And Jesus himself, now listen here. Jesus made it very clear in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 to 23. There will be people, many, not just a few, many who are going to come to him in the last days saying, we've prophesied, we've done all these great things. We were operating as a prophet. We're prophets. Jesus didn't deny that. He did not deny that. But he said, you are sinner. You got sin. You're full of sin. Therefore, depart from me, you worker of iniquity. He would reject them on the last day, reject them on the day of judgment. So being a prophet or a prophetess, yeah, that's amazing. But that does not mean that what Deborah was doing was God's will. Sure, God used Deborah to speak to people. I don't doubt that. He used a donkey to speak to Balaam. Okay, so it doesn't mean that that's God's perfect will for Deborah. It just means that he used what was there at that time, just like he used the donkey that was there in Balaam's time. Deborah's position was not ordained of God. We read about it in the scriptures very clearly. God told Moses, you go and you do this. I'll put you in a place of authority over the nation of Israel. Very clearly, talking about Aaron, that he put Aaron in a place of authority over Israel. Very clearly, he put Joshua and Caleb in places of authority over Israel. There's people very clearly God speaks to, and it says very explicitly that God chose these people and he had this job for them. Not so with Deborah. Not so with Deborah. He did not choose Deborah to be a judge over the people of Israel at that time, and don't let anybody tell you different.